Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to day 83 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 4. And we are in chapter 29, titled Talks Between Narada and King Prachinabharahi. And we're going to carry on today from verse 49, which is in a section titled, Don't Worship Demigods, Just Take Shelter of Krishna. That section goes from verse 47 to verse 51, and we're in the middle of that. We're going to continue from verse 49. But first of all, let us chant our prayers. Nama Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastya Chadejatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhunichananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. All right, devotees, so continuing on from verse 49. And Narada Muni speaking to King Prachinabharahi, also known as King Bharhishman or King Prachinabharahi. Verse 49, my dear king, the entire world is covered with the sharp points of kusha grass, and on the strength of this you've become proud because you've killed various types of animals and sacrifices. Because of your foolishness, you do not know that devotional service is the only way one can please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. You cannot understand this fact. Your only activities should be those that can please the Personality of Godhead. Our education should be such that we can become elevated to Krishna consciousness. Very good. Let us have a look at the purport. And Srila Prabhupada makes the point that Narada Muni is preaching very strongly. He's really preaching very strongly indeed to the king. Prabhupada says that Narada Muni is he directly insults the king about his animal sacrifices. The king thought that it was a great qualification of his. He was becoming a great man for having performed so many sacrifices, but Narada Muni is chastising him, telling him that his animal killing just has led to him becoming proud. So, and Prabhupada makes the point, anything that's done which does not lead to Krishna consciousness is sinful activity. Yeah, that's very powerful and that's very deep, but it's very true that we're eternal Krishna conscious beings, and our nature is to be Krishna's servants. As Lord Chaitanya said, Jivera Swarupaya Krishnera Nityadas. The Swarup, the constitutional nature of the living entity, or you could say the soul, is to be the eternal servant of Krishna. And if we live in any other way than serving Krishna, it's all false. It's all false. And it can be understood to be sinful activity in the sense of unnatural activity. So anyway, any education which doesn't lead to understanding Krishna is false education. Prabhupada's really, as Narada Muni is speaking very strongly, Prabhupada's speaking very strongly. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, if Krishna consciousness is missing, one is simply engaged in false activities and false educational pursuits. Verse 50, Sri Hari, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the supersoul and guide of all living entities who have accepted material bodies within this world. He is the supreme controller of all material activities in material nature. He's also our best friend, and everyone should take shelter at his lotus feet. In doing so, one's life will be auspicious. So yes, that's very wonderful, very encouraging. The Supreme Lord is the supreme controller, and he's our best friend. And if we take shelter of him, our lives will be auspicious. So Srila Prabhupada says in the purport, first thing, Krishna is the controller. Then he's Antaryami, means he's the super soul, Cheta Guru, the guru within the heart. And Prabhupada quotes famous verse, Bhagavad Gita 15:15, Savasya chamriti sanavishto matasmriti aganam aponam cha, which translates to, I am situated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. So we go on, devotees, to the second paragraph. Prabhupada makes the point, everything's being directed by the super soul within the body. So best thing is to just take his direction. Yes, the better part of valor. You can do something to try and make yourself seem prominent as a hero. But if you really just want to make progress, then take his direction and be happy, because he's the supreme controller and the supreme entity. But anyway, if you want to take his direction, you have to be a devotee. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita chapter 10, verse 10, which we've just over the last few days, we've encountered this verse repeatedly. Tesham sadati yuktanam bhajatam pritipurvikam dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mamupiyanti te. To those who are constantly devoted and worship me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. Right, so let's see. Third paragraph. Now, this is a very important point. Even though the super soul's within the heart of every living entity, not just the humans, but every living entity, but he only talks to pure devotees. He doesn't really interact with anyone other than his devotees who are constantly engaged in his service. Prabhupada quotes this, a number of verses here from Chaitanya Bhagavat, in which what Prabhupada is doing is talking about education, different types of education, and how the best education is education in Krishna consciousness. Towards the end, well, Prabhupada concludes, you can have a look at those verses. They're all very interesting. They're all about education, culture and education. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, everyone has dormant love for Krishna, and by culture and education, that has to be awakened. That is the purpose of this Krishna consciousness movement. Once Lord Chaitanya asked Sri Ramananda Roy, what is the best part of education? And Ramananda replied that the best part of education is advancement in Krishna consciousness. And that's the bottom line of in regards to what these verses, these 3 or 4 verses or so, or 5, whatever it is, what they're saying. Verse 51, one who is engaged in devotional service has not the least fear in material existence. This is because the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the Supersoul and friend of everyone. One who knows this secret is actually educated, and one thus educated can become the spiritual master of the world. One who is actually one who is an actually bona fide spiritual master, representative of Krishna, is not different from Krishna. That's interesting, isn't it? Bona fide spiritual master, not different from Krishna. So let's look at the purport. Srila Prabhupada refers to verse 7 of Guruvastakam, which we sing at Mangal Arati, Sakshad Hari Tvenasamasta Shastra, Uktas Tata Bhavyata Eva Sadbi. And Prabhupada gives a sort of paraphrasing of the translation. It's like an explanation rather than just a word-for-word translation. Prabhupada says, the spiritual master is described in every scripture as the representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The spiritual master is accepted as identical with the Supreme Personality of Godhead because he's the most confidential servant of the Lord. So let's just mention a word or two about this concept, because it can easily be confusing for people who are not used to these ideas. That, for example, when the ambassador, official ambassador, representative of the government of a particular nation, addresses, say, the parliament in the country where he is stationed as the representative, as the ambassador. So when the ambassador speaks, then it's understood that it's official. The government of that country is speaking. It's not just some man walked in and said, you know what I think about some matter. No, he represents the government, and therefore there's a type of oneness that when he speaks, then people know the government of that country is speaking. So similarly, Krishna in Bhagavad Gita says, surrender to me. The bona fide spiritual master says, surrender to Krishna. So the message is the same, exactly the same. So therefore there is a oneness between the bona fide spiritual master and Krishna. There's a type of oneness. Not that they actually merge and become one sort of entity, but representing, and therefore there's the oneness. So anyway, Prabhupada says the purport is that both super soul and soul are very dear to everyone. Everyone loves himself, of course, and when they become more advanced, they love the super soul as well. So people who are self-realized don't recommend to worship anyone except the super soul. And it's easier than worshipping demigods under the influence of lust, because generally that's what demigod worship is about, that you want something in this world, so you approach the demigod who is in charge of that particular thing in this world, and you worship that demigod, then you get that particular thing from them. In other words, it's under the influence of lust. It's materialistic. And therefore it's different from love for the Lord, and it's different from devotional service as a process. So anyway, the devotee is always engaged in devotional service. And Prabhupada says such a person, always engaged in devotional service, is a true guru. Prabhupada quotes Padma Purana, which it's also, this particular verse appears in Nectar of Devotion. But let's just read the verse. Well, I'll just read the translation. Even if a Brahmin is very learned in Vedic scriptures and knows the 6 occupational duties of a Brahmin, he cannot become a guru or spiritual master unless he is a devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. However, if one is born in a family of dog-eaters, but is a pure devotee of the Lord, he can become a spiritual master. Yes. Because the point is to know the Lord, to understand the Lord, at least sufficiently. So anyway, the conclusion there is that one cannot become a spiritual master unless he is a pure devotee of the Lord. And in the terms that we were talking about of the oneness, particularly in terms of the message. So such a spiritual master who's just repeating the message, giving the message, and not concocting that, well, I think this, or, I don't think that. Like that. So such a spiritual master is to be understood, Prabhupada says, as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, personally present, in terms of that idea of oneness, of message. And therefore, as Prabhupada says here, that therefore consulting a bona fide spiritual master means you're consulting the Lord. So we should take shelter of such a spiritual master. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, success in life means accepting a spiritual master who knows Krishna as the only Supreme Beloved Personality. One should worship such a confidential devotee of the Lord. Right, so the next section, number 7, verse 52 to verse 55, Narada tells the story of the deer. Okay, let's read through the verses. 52. The great Saint Narada continued, O great personality, I have replied properly about all that you've asked me. Now hear another narration that is accepted by saintly persons and is very confidential. Verse 53, my dear king, please search out that deer who is engaged in eating grass in a very nice flower garden along with his wife. That deer is very much attached to his business, and he's enjoying the sweet singing of the bumblebees in his garden. Just try to understand his position. He's unaware that before him is a tiger, which is accustomed to living at the cost of another's flesh. Behind the deer is a hunter who is threatening to pierce him with sharp arrows. Thus, the deer's death is imminent, just now coming. Verse 54, my dear king, woman, who is very attractive in the beginning, but in the end very disturbing, is exactly like the flower, which is attractive in the beginning and detestable at the end. With woman, the living entity is entangled with lusty desires, and he enjoys sex just as one enjoys the aroma of a flower. He thus enjoys a life of sense gratification from his tongue to his genitals, and in this way the living entity considers himself very happy in family life. United with his wife, he always remains absorbed in such thoughts. He feels great pleasure in hearing the talks of his wife and children, which are like the sweet humming of bumblebees that collect honey from flower to flower. He forgets that before him is time, which is taking away his lifespan with the passing of day and night. He does not see the gradual diminishing of his life, nor does he care about the superintendent of death who's trying to kill him from behind. Just try to understand this. You're in a precarious position and are threatened from all sides. Verse 55, my dear king. Just try to understand the allegorical position of the deer. Be fully conscious of yourself and give up the pleasure of hearing about promotion to heavenly planets by fruit of activity. Give up household life, which is full of sex, as well as stories about such things, and take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead through the mercy of the liberated souls. In this way, please give up your attraction for material existence. Right, okay, so now we'll go back to the beginning of this section. Verse 52 to 55, the narrator tells the story of the deer. 52, the great Saint Narada continued, O great personality, I have replied properly about all that you've asked me. Now hear another narration that is accepted by saintly persons and is very confidential. Right, so Prabhupada comments that Prachinabarishat is still hesitant. He's not convinced, or is not accepting at least. And here Narada Muni is acting as his spiritual master by instructing him and trying to clarify all these things. Narada, of course, wants him to give up all his fruitive engagements, take to devotional service now, but the king's not ready. He was thinking of sending for his sons, have them come back, then hand over the kingdom, and then leave home. In other words, he's hesitating. And many people, when they accept a spiritual master, and the spiritual master says, leave home, many people hesitate. And, not just when or if he says leave home. Maybe not so many devotees, but sometimes it happens. The spiritual master gives an instruction, I want you to do this. But the devotee feels, I can't do it. And even, with Srila Prabhupada was told by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta to preach in English all over the world. And Prabhupada did that. He certainly did. But it took him some time to come to the point of doing that because of the situation he was in at that particular point initially. Yeah. So anyway, Prabhupada changes subject slightly. The duty of the spiritual master, a duty, is to instruct that fruitive activities are not beneficial. Only Krishna conscious activities. So better to take to Krishna consciousness from the beginning of life, ultimately, but at least now, now when you get instructed, better to take to it right away. Prahlad advised to take up Krishna consciousness in childhood. Prabhupada quotes the part of the Sanskrit of that verse. So, but otherwise, according to Vedic instructions, if you don't take to Krishna consciousness, you're just wasting your time in fruitive activities on the material level. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, Narada Muni therefore decided to relate another allegory to the king, so that he might be induced to give up family life within material existence. That's very important. So this is the story of the deer, which we are kind of involved in right now. Verse 53, My dear king, please search out that deer who's engaged in eating grass in a very nice flower garden along with his wife. That deer is very much attached to his business, and he's enjoying the sweet singing of the bumblebees in his garden. Just try to understand his position. He is unaware that before him is a tiger, which is accustomed to living at the cost of another's flesh. Behind the deer is a hunter who is threatening to pierce him with sharp arrows. Thus the deer's death is imminent. Yeah, I mean, the basic idea is the deer feels life is good. He's in a nice flower garden. His wife is there. It's all very nice. But little does he know that death is there in the form of the tiger and the hunter. So he's like surrounded by death. So Narada Muni tells the king to find the deer who's in a dangerous position. I mean, to understand what is the position of the deer and understand the reality of it. That even though some things are nice, he can eat the grass very nicely, but there are great dangers, fatal dangers, just right there. So similarly, all living entities are like that, particularly the humans. They think they're happy in their family life with their wife and their children. It's all very nice. The children talking that's compared to the humming of bumblebees. So the householder enjoys the family, but he forgets or he just doesn't know that time, represented by the tiger, is just coming and just eating, and he's going to be in a fatal situation. So then on the other hand, the living entity's fruitive activities are a second danger. Sometimes deer run after a mirage, the mirage of water in the desert, and deer are also fond of sex life. So Prabhupada says the conclusion is, one who lives like the deer will be killed in due course of time. So therefore Vedic literature advises we understand our constitutional position and then take to devotional service before death comes. And, it may be too late. Yeah, better just now get everything clear. So Prabhupada quotes Srimad Bhagavatam 11:9-29. I won't read all the Sanskrit, but the point is, after many births we have attained this human form of life, and therefore before death comes we should engage ourselves in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. And that's the fulfillment of human life. Verse 54, My dear king, woman who is very attractive in the beginning, but in the end very disturbing, is exactly like the flower which the deer is smelling the aroma of. exactly like the flower, which is attractive in the beginning and detestable at the end. A flower looks very nice at first, but it doesn't take long before it shrivels up and just rots like that. So woman is like that, attractive in the beginning and detestable at the end. With woman, the living entity is entangled with lusty desires, and he enjoys sex, just as one enjoys the aroma of a flower. He thus enjoys a life of sense gratification, from his tongue to his genitals, and in this way the living entity considers himself very happy in family life. United with his wife, he always remains absorbed in such thoughts. He feels great pleasure in hearing the talks of his wife and children, which are like the sweet humming of bumblebees that collect honey from flower to flower. He forgets that before him is time, which is taking away his lifespan with the passing of day and night. He does not see the gradual diminishing of his life, nor does he care about the superintendent of death who's trying to kill him from behind. Just try to understand this. See how Narada is speaking so strongly now, preaching. He wants to get him to make a change in his life. So just try to understand this. You are in a precarious position and are threatened from all sides. So, okay, Srila Prabhupada gives a purport here, and he begins by pointing out the problems, some of the problems of the Grihastha ashram. And really, Prabhupada is very explicit here. He's just really clear, really clear, that, first of all, in principle, Prabhupada says materialistic life means forgetting our constitutional position as the eternal servant of the Lord. And this forgetfulness is enhanced in the Grihastha ashram. So in the Grihastha ashram, here, let's have a look at this. Prabhupada's going to really get into this. So the young man gets a nice wife. In the beginning, she's very beautiful. Later, after having a number of children and becoming older and becoming very demanding, we need this, we need that, and the husband is just like, we need everything practically. So it's very difficult for him. So therefore, Prabhupada says, eventually she becomes detestable to the same young man who accepted her in youth. In the end, it's like that, just please leave me alone. So Prabhupada makes a very interesting point. A person becomes attached to the Grihastha ashram for two reasons. One, the wife cooks nicely. Two, she gives him sex at night. And the man therefore always thinks of these two things. So the wife's talks, they're like a family recreation. And the children's talks, attract the living entity, so he forgets he's going to die. And he should be preparing now for his next life, if he wants to have a nice body or nice next life. So the second paragraph, Prabhupada explains the deer in the garden is an allegory used by Narada to point out to the king that he, the king, is trapped by those surroundings, the whole family situation. And Prabhupada quotes Prahlad, 7th Canto, chapter 5, verse 5, and I won't read the Sanskrit, but Prabhupada gives a translation in effect. Family life's considered a blind well, under kupam. Under means blind, kupa means a well, which a person falls into and dies in. So Prahlad recommends that while your senses are together, while you're strong enough, give up the Grihastha ashram. Take shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord. Go to Vrindavan. Yes. So Prabhupada makes the point, according to Vedic civilization, Prabhupada actually says, one has to give up family life. Read it there, see it. Prabhupada says one has to give up family life at 50. One has to. Take vanaprastha and eventually live alone as a sannyasi. And that is the prescription of Varnashram. And by doing this, you please the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Vishnu. So, Prabhupada continues on with the third paragraph. You have to use your intelligence to understand your position in family life, worldly life. Don't just remain entangled and trapped there just to satisfy the tongue and the genitals with the wife and spoil your life. So you have to leave the family, even by force if necessary, at a certain age. And Prabhupada did that himself. So, but unfortunately, the so-called followers of Vedic life, they don't give up their family, even at the end of life, unless they're just forced by death. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, there should be a thorough overhauling of the social system, and society should revert to the Vedic principles. That is, the 4 varnas and the 4 ashrams. 55. My dear king, just try to understand the allegorical position of the deer. Be fully conscious of yourself and give up the pleasure of hearing about promotion to heavenly planets by fruitive activity. Give up household life, which is full of sex, as well as stories about such things, and take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead through the mercy of the liberated souls. In this way, please give up your attraction for material existence. So Srila Prabhupada refers to Srila Narottam Das Thakur, a verse which we have come across a number of times. Karma Kanda Jnana Kanda Kevala Vishera Bandha Amrita Baliya Yebakai Nanayoni Sadapire Kadarya Bhakshana Kare Tara Janma Adapateyaya, which means fruitive activities and mental speculation are simply cups of poison, Kevala Vishera Bandha, just cups of poison. Whoever drinks them, thinking them to be nectar, must struggle very hard life after life in different types of bodies. Such a person eats all kinds of nonsense and becomes condemned by his activities of so-called sense enjoyment. Second paragraph, people are generally enamored by promotion to heavenly planets through some karma kandya system, merging into Brahman through mental speculation, impersonalism, or just keeping themselves in the middle of family life, enchanted by the pleasures of the tongue and the genitals and having the children around, etc. So Narada Muni, he is clearly instructing the king, don't remain for life in the Grihastha ashram under the control of your wife. You must give it up and take to the Paramahansa ashram under the control of the spiritual master. So that Paramahansa ashram is the ashram of the Supreme Lord, under whom the spiritual master has taken shelter. So Srila Prabhupada quotes Bhagavatam 11.3.21, which explains the symptoms of a bona fide spiritual master. Tasmad gurum prapadyeta jigyasu shreya uttamam shabde parecha nishnatam brahman upashamashrayam. Any person who's seriously desirous of achieving real happiness must seek out a bona fide spiritual master and take shelter of him by initiation. The qualification of a spiritual master is that he must have realized the conclusion of the scriptures by deliberation and arguments, and thus be able to convince others of these conclusions. Such great personalities who have taken complete shelter of the Supreme Godhead, leaving aside all material considerations, are to be understood as bona fide spiritual masters. Third paragraph. So Paramahansa, the term was used in the previous paragraph, means one who's taken shelter of the Parabrahman, the Lord. I mean, literally, Parama means supreme, and Hansa means swan or swan-like person. The supremely swan-like person, greatest devotee. So if you take shelter of such a spiritual master, then gradually, through training, instruction, you'll become detached from worldly life. You'll go back to Godhead. And Prabhupada says that mention of Angan Ashramam Asatama Yuta Gatam. Prabhupada says this is very interesting. It's in the third line of the Sanskrit, and it means that household life, abominable household life, full of stories of man and woman. And Prabhupada sort of paraphrases that one is not only controlled by the wife, but by reading sex literatures. Sort of the plot thickens in household life. So you can't give up this abominable association by your own effort, but if you take shelter of a bona fide spiritual master who is a Paramahansa, gradually you'll be elevated. And the fourth paragraph, in the Vedas, there's certain like Karmakandya sections where very pleasing words are spoken about going to the heavenly planets or merging into the effulgence of the Lord. These are for less intelligent people who are in Bhagavad Gita called Maya Paritagyana, means people whose knowledge is stolen by Maya or illusion. So Srila Prabhupada makes the point that according to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, the term Hansa Sharanam refers to a cottage where a saintly person lives. And they usually stay in remote areas or in the forest in some humble cottage. But now Prabhupada makes very important points. Since the time of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, things have changed. As preachers, we can't do that, go to some remote place in a very sattvic little cottage and that's it. What we have to do, we have to make proper arrangements to receive people and attract them to Krishna consciousness. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta used cars, nice buildings to attract people. So now there's no going to the forest to find the saints. The saints have come to the cities. So gradually people will learn that for Krishna consciousness, you don't need extravagant facilities and all that. Prabhupada quotes Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 12255. When one is not attached to anything, but at the same time accepts everything in relation to Krishna, one's rightly situated above possessiveness. And the fifth paragraph, Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, one should not be attached to material opulence, but material opulence may be accepted in the Krishna consciousness movement to facilitate the propagation of the movement. In other words, material opulence may be accepted as yukta vairagya, that is, for renunciation. Right, so we go on to the next section, number 8, verse 56 to verse 59. Prachana Barishat realizes he was misinformed before. Let's read the verses. 56, the king replied, "My dear Brahman, whatever you've said I've heard with great attention, and considering all of it, I have come to the conclusion that the acharyas, the teachers, who engaged me in fruitive activity, did not know this confidential knowledge. If they were aware of it, why did they not explain it to me?" Just see, Prachana Barishat's really becoming, he's really waking up by the instructions of Narada. 57, my dear Brahman, there are contradictions between your instructions and those of my spiritual teachers who engaged me in fruitive activities. I now can understand the distinction between devotional service, knowledge, and renunciation. I had some doubts about them, but you have now very kindly dissipated all these doubts. I can now understand how even the great sages are bewildered by the real purpose of life. Of course, there is no question of sense gratification. Verse 58. The results of whatever a living entity does in this life are enjoyed in the next life. Right, that's verse 58 and 59. The expert knowers of the Vedic conclusions say that one enjoys or suffers the results of his past activities. But practically it's seen that the body that performed the work in the last birth is already lost. So how is it possible to enjoy or suffer the reactions of that work in a different body? Interesting question. Okay, so let's go through again with purports. And we call this Prachana Barishat realizes he was misinformed before. 56 to 59. 56, the king replied, my dear Brahman, whatever you have said I've heard with great attention, and considering all of it, have come to the conclusion that the acharyas, the teachers, who engaged me in fruitive activity, did not know this confidential knowledge. If they were aware of it, why did they not explain it to me? Yes, so Prabhupada makes the point that here we see the king is coming to his senses. His previous so-called teachers didn't know the goal of life. And in terms of Bhagavad Gita, they would be called Mayaya Parita Jnana. Their knowledge is stolen by illusion. So real knowledge means to search out Krishna, because he's the source of everything. He's Janmad Yasya Yataha, the original source of birth, as Bhagavatam 1.1.1 says. He's Aham Adir Hi Devanam, as Bhagavad Gita chapter 10 verse 2 says. that he's the source of the demigods and everything. He's the source of Lord Brahma, Shiva, etc. So the Vedic rituals are to satisfy these demigods, but he is the source of the demigods. But unless you're advanced, you won't understand Krishna's position as the original person. So now Prachina Barishad is coming to his senses. So he's decided to reject those people, Karma Kandiya people, who are just telling him to do materialistic fruitive sacrifices. Yeah. And they have no instruction of the goal of life. And Prabhupada makes the point, this is the situation. In all the churches, temples, and mosques, it's all materialistic. People are being kept in ignorance and not being helped to get out of Maya and go back to Godhead. Therefore, the Krishna consciousness movement is vital for enlightening everyone. So everyone should follow in the king's footsteps, reject stereotyped ceremonies, become Krishna conscious. So we see, Prabhupada makes the point that the Goswamis, the 6 Goswamis, they differed from the priestly class involved in rituals. Yeah. Sanatana Goswami compiled Hari Bhakti Vilas to guide the devotees. So the Vaishnavas don't care for these lifeless activities of the priestly class. They take to Krishna consciousness and become perfect. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, that is described in the previous verse as Paramahansa Sharanam, taking shelter of the Paramahansa, the liberated soul, and becoming successful in this life. 57. My dear Brahman, there are contradictions between your instructions and those of my spiritual teachers who engaged me in fruitive activities. I now can understand the distinction between devotional service, knowledge, and renunciation. I had some doubts about them, but you have now very kindly dissipated all these doubts. I can now understand how even the great sages are bewildered by the real purpose of life. Of course, there's no question of sense gratification. So, okay, Prabhupada's purport. We have experience that sometimes the priestly class don't like Krishna consciousness. Yeah. So, previously, of course, we know what the king had been doing, trying sacrifices for the heavenly planets. People are usually attracted by these, not Krishna consciousness. Only the very fortunate take to Krishna consciousness. Generally, people want sense gratification. So even the Vedic scholars are bewildered and don't understand devotional service. There's no sense gratification in devotional service, just service to the Lord. So therefore, Prabhupada makes the point, the Brahmins, many of them, have been against Krishna consciousness for a long time. Like in Lord Chaitanya's time, they complained to the Kazi about the Sankirtan movement. So Lord Chaitanya had to lead a civil disobedience movement. So they're known as karma jadasmartas. So to save yourself from them, you must strictly follow the instructions of the Lord. Sarvadharma parityaja, just abandon all varieties of religion, just surrender to Krishna. Verse 58. And again, it's this little translation. It took me by surprise. The results of whatever a living entity does in this life are enjoyed in the next life. So there's a link. There is a link from this life into the next life. Yeah. Generally, people don't understand that. So therefore the king is asking Narada, how can someone with a human body in this life not have a human body in the next life? And even great philosophers and scientists can't understand this transferal of karma from one life to another. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, as we experience, every individual soul has an individual body, and one person's activities or one body's activities are not enjoyed or suffered by another body or another person. The question is how the activities of one body are suffered or enjoyed in the next. Good question. Verse 59. The expert knowers of the Vedic conclusions say that one enjoys or suffers the results of his past activities. But practically it's seen that the body that performed the work in the last birth is already lost. So how's it possible to enjoy or suffer the reactions of that work in a different body? Prabhupada raises the point that atheists want some sort of proof along these lines. Why I'm suffering or enjoying the reactions of my past karma from a previous lifetime. They have no idea that the subtle body carries the results of the present body's activities to the next body. The gross body may be finished, but the subtle body isn't. And the gross body is dependent on the subtle body. That's the explanation. There you go. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, therefore the next gross body must suffer and enjoy according to the subtle body. The soul is carried by the subtle body continuously until liberated from gross material bondage. There you go, devotees. Okay, we will continue tomorrow. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.